So imagine you're tasked with laying down steel tracks for, like, a high-speed rail line. But the catch is, the bullet train is already just barreling down your neck at 300 miles an hour.
Right, you don't have time to survey the terrain or anything.
Exactly. You aren't checking the soil density. You're definitely not running safety tests. You are literally just throwing down metal as fast as humanly possible and, just hoping that next mile actually holds.
Which is a terrifying way to build a railroad.
It really is. And welcome to the deep dive, by the way, because today, that is exactly what we're looking at. We are opening up Aaron Rose's highly anticipated Tech Reader AI Digest from today, July 15th, 2026.
Yeah, and it is just a remarkable snapshot of this very specific tension we're seeing right now. We are sitting at the exact collision point between this breakneck technological capability and, well, a regulatory framework that is, quite frankly, is crumbling under the weight of that speed.
Totally. So our mission today, for you listening, is to really cut through the marketing noise. We're looking at failing safety grades from the biggest names in tech, trillion-dollar infrastructure plays overseas, and some incredibly high-stakes legal traps.
Right. We want to figure out the actual mechanics of what the next decade of this technology looks like beneath all the slick launch events and the PR.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand where the industry is today, we have to recognize where the guardrails currently stand, or I guess where they don't stand.
Exactly. For the last couple of years, the entire premise of keeping these AI systems in check was built on, essentially, a gentleman's agreement.
Right, those voluntary safety commitments we heard so much about.
Yeah, the leading labs raised billions of dollars while promising the public, and regulators for that matter, that they had these really rigorous internal stopgaps.
But the Future of Life Institute just released their summer 2026 AI Safety Index, and they basically took a sledgehammer to that entire narrative.
Oh, they absolutely did. I mean, they graded every major frontier AI lab on risk management, transparency, governance.
And the distribution of those grades tells a really, really dark story about the industry's actual priorities.
Yeah. I mean, do you have the grades in front of you?
I do, yeah. So nobody passed. Literally nobody. Anthropic led the pack, and they barely scraped by with a C+.
A C+ is the top of the class.
Right. And then OpenAI and Google DeepMind landed at a C, Meta got a D+, and then XAI, DeepSeek, and Mistral, they just failed completely. Outright failed.
It's wild.
It is. It's like looking at a school report card where the supposed valedictorian gets a C+ pub-um.
Yeah.
That doesn't tell me we have a smart student, It tells me the entire curriculum is broken.
That's a great way to put it. And UC Berkeley's Stuart Russell, who actually sat on the index's review panel, he isolated the exact mechanism behind these failures.
What did he find?
Well, he documented this systemic pattern of what the panel calls moving goalpost behavior. So 2 years ago, when the pressure was really on to look responsible during those initial funding rounds.
Right, when they needed the billions.
Exactly. They drew these hard red lines. They established explicit benchmarks for dangerous capabilities, stating that, if their models hit those markers, they would just halt development until safety protocols caught up.
But the FLI index found that these labs are now just quietly erasing those red lines. Like, they are altering the terms of their own pledges.
Yeah.
And the justification is wild to me. They are citing, quote, competitor contingent conditions.
Right, which is just the classic prisoner's dilemma playing out in real time.
How so?
Well, Anthropic or Google might see a red line approaching, but because Meta or XAI is just pushing ahead without any constraints, the labs with the passing grades or passing-ish grades are voiding their own commitments just to avoid losing ground. Yeah. Stuart Russell's team found explicit evidence that labs are now preparing to release systems even when their own internal metrics suggest it might be unsafe to do so.
That's just reckless. And it goes beyond just consumer risk, too. The report highlighted that all 5 of the major U.S. and EU labs have reversed their previous bans on military applications.
Right.
Like, XAI's active defense partnerships actually contributed to their failing grade.
Right.
So I have to play the skeptic here for a second.
Go for it.
If all these organizations are shredding their own safety blueprints the very second they feel the heat of market competition, doesn't that mean these voluntary pledges were just, a fundraising tactic, a PR shield to hold off government regulation while they built the tech?
What's fascinating here is that the U.S. government is waking up to that exact question right now.
Yeah.
Aaron Rose's Digest points out that the vast majority of enterprise models that are currently running our hospitals, our cybersecurity grids, our financial institutions, they're built by organizations that an independent panel just said are failing basic safety standards.
Which is terrifying when you really think about it.
It is. And it forces a pivot. Because in 2 weeks, on August 1st, the National Security Agency and CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they are mandated to deliver a joint AI governance framework.
And up until now, the White House strategy leaned really heavily on those voluntary commitments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the FLI index just handed CISA basically mathematical proof that voluntary self-regulation is a failed experiment.
Right, because the labs prove they literally can't govern themselves.
Right, so the regulatory vacuum is going to be filled with mandates. The August 1 framework isn't going to be about asking nicely anymore.
It's shifting from whether to regulate to what to regulate.
Exactly. The policy conversation is rapidly shifting towards strict hardware monitoring and actual deployment restrictions.
And, when voluntary guardrails fail, the vacuum doesn't just get filled by regulators, it gets aggressively filled by lawyers.
Oh, absolutely.
The legal system is stepping in to provide the hard boundaries the industry just refuses to set for itself. I mean, look at the New York Times.
Right, the lawsuit.
Yeah, backed by this massive coalition of publishers, they just escalated their copyright infringement lawsuit against OpenAI in a really major way. They are seeking federal sanctions.
Which is a severe procedural maneuver.
Yep.
I mean, the Times is alleging that OpenAI is actively withholding the training data evidence that's required for discovery.
Right. And just to ground this in reality for a second, this isn't the equivalent of getting pulled over and handed a speeding ticket.
No, not at all.
This is like the police holding a search warrant for your trunk, and you as the driver are just refusing to hand over the keys, literally daring them to break the window.
Yeah.
The coalition is accusing OpenAI of obstructing the legal process itself.
And the friction here really comes down to how these models are fundamentally built in the first place. I mean, every single frontier model, whether it's OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Meta, they were all constructed by ingesting massive, massive data sets of scraped internet text.
Right, the entire internet, basically.
Yeah. And the core legal debate, which is still unresolved, is whether training a commercial neural network on copyrighted material without a license is fair use, or if it's just rampant theft.
And if the publishers actually force OpenAI to open that black box and say a federal judge rules that the training process itself is copyright infringement, the blast radius doesn't stop at OpenAI.
Oh, no. It undermines the legal architecture of the entire generative AI industry. Google, Meta, all of them.
Which brings us to this impending trap set for OpenAI this September, because they are targeting an IPO and they have that staggering $42.6 billion government stake proposal just waiting for a response.
Right.
But to go public, OpenAI has to execute an S-1 filing with the SEC. And I want you to explain how that S-1 filing actually works, because that seems to be the real choke point here, not necessarily the sanctions motion itself.
Yeah, that's the real trap. So an S-1 is the foundational registration document for any new public offering. The SEC requires a company to list, and this is key, under penalty of perjury, every single material risk and liability they face.
So public investors actually know what they're buying into.
Exactly. Up until now, OpenAI has been able to keep their training data composition a closely guarded trade secret. They just don't talk about it.
Right.
But in an S-1, if you are currently embroiled in a federal lawsuit that could literally deem your core product illegal, you have to quantify that exposure.
You can't just brush it off. Like, if they lie or just omit the scale of the copyrighted material they used, that's not just a PR mistake, that's securities fraud.
Exactly. The S-1 forces OpenAI to describe their training data liability under oath.
Wow.
So for competitors, for investors, for the publishers, that filing will be the most heavily scrutinized document of the decade, because it finally converts this theoretical legal debate into a sworn financial reality.
So while the U.S. giants are bogged down in federal court over scraped data and, failing their watchdog safety grades left and right, the international landscape is operating on a completely different paradigm.
Oh, completely.
Like, other nations are not looking at AI as just some software application you download. They are treating it as hard physical infrastructure.
Yeah, the physical footprint of this technology is something we just chronically underestimate.
Yeah.
We talk about the cloud as if it's this ethereal, invisible thing, but it is deeply, deeply industrial.
And South Korea is putting actual concrete behind that idea right now. They just rolled out a 10-year national AI and semiconductor investment plan worth 1,350 trillion won.
Which is astronomical.
Right. That translates to roughly 880 billion US dollars.
And just to put that in perspective for you, that is the largest sovereign AI commitment outside the geopolitical heavyweights of the US and China.
It's massive. President Lee Jae-myung announced a triple axis strategy alongside the heads of Samsung and SK hynix.
Okay, break that down.
So Axis 1, $518 billion poured directly into semiconductor manufacturing.
Wow.
Axis 2, $550 billion dedicated to AI data centers, targeting 8.4 gigawatts of power capacity by 2029.
8.4 gigawatts is that's a mind-bending amount of power.
It really is. And then Axis 3, an aggressive push into humanoid robotics, aiming to take South Korea's global market share from 1% to 20% in just 2 years, by 2028.
Yeah, see, that robotics ambition is a massive vulnerability in this whole plan.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to throw a flag on the play there, too. We've seen governments try to spend their way to dominance in these hyper-agile tech sectors before.
Right.
And it frequently results in bloated, top-heavy failures. Can a sovereign wealth fund actually out-innovate cutthroat, market-driven robotics companies like Boston Dynamics or Tesla just by throwing money at a buzzword? Or is this destined to fail?
Historically, no, they can't. But while the robotics goal might be a total political moonshot, the semiconductor and data center axes are deadly serious.
Because they already have the players.
Exactly. It's grounded in the actual mechanics of how AI works. You mentioned the 8.4 gigawatts of power. Training a frontier AI model isn't like running a traditional software server. You are networking tens of thousands of specialized GPUs together and running these complex matrix multiplications continuously for months.
And that draws an unbelievable amount of electricity, not to mention it requires just oceans of water just to keep the silicon from physically melting down.
Precisely. And those GPUs, they require a very specific type of hardware called high bandwidth memory, or HBM. And SK hynix and Samsung, both South Korean companies, they essentially have a stranglehold on the global HBM market right now.
Really?
Yeah. The data bottleneck in AI isn't just processing speed anymore. It's how fast you can shuttle data between the processor and the memory.
Oh, that makes sense.
SK hynix just set records on the NASDAQ because they manufacture the exact physical material required to break that bottleneck. And TSMC, out of Taiwan, they just posted nearly $40 billion in Q2 revenue, strictly from AI chip demand.
40 billion just on chips. I mean, the compute costs are so astronomical that Aaron Rose notes in the digest that Anthropic is in talks with Samsung right now to build custom silicon just to shrink their $1.25 billion monthly compute bill.
Monthly.
Yeah, $1 billion a month.
When you look at those numbers, the geopolitical consensus becomes incredibly clear. The European Union, China, South Korea, the US, they no longer view AI as a tech product. They view it exactly like highways and the electricity grid.
Right.
It is a fundamental layer of national infrastructure. It is the new electrical grid. The nations that control the physical choke points, the memory chips, the power generation, the cooling facilities, they're going to dictate the terms of the global economy for the next century.
And that brings us to a really fascinating collision course on the calendar, because all of these macro forces, the failing safety grids we talked about, the S1 legal traps, the trillion-dollar infrastructure arms race, they are all converging in exactly 2 days, July 17th, 2026.
Yeah. The convergence of events in this specific week will likely dictate the operating environment for the rest of the decade.
So on the capability side, Google is expected to drop Gemini 3.5 Pro into general availability, and the market is brutally crowded right now.
It really is.
They are going head-to-head with GPT 5.6 Sol, Claude Sonnet 5, and Grok 4.5. But Google is reportedly pushing 2 major differentiators, a deep think reasoning architecture and a staggering 2.1 million token context window.
And that context window is the absolute battleground for enterprise adoption right now.
But I need you to explain the mechanics here, because let's be honest, we have been sold massive context windows before.
Yeah.
The labs say, upload your entire corporate history.
Right.
But when normal users actually try it, the model suffers from that 500K token failure mode. Like, it remembers the introduction, it remembers the conclusion, but it completely hallucinates or forgets chapter 3.
Right.
If I can put a whole library into a 2.1 million token window, but the AI can't recall the middle of the document, what's the point? It's just a marketing gimmick.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are describing the needle in a haystack problem, which is a fundamental flaw in how large language models manage attention.
Okay.
Without getting too bogged down in the math, An LLM works by predicting the next word based on the mathematical relationship to all the surrounding words. When your context is just a few pages, the model easily calculates how every word relates to every other word.
But when you scale that up to 2.1 million tokens,
The computational complexity just explodes. The model's attention mechanism gets stretched incredibly thin. So to save compute power, it takes shortcuts, usually weighting the very beginning and the very end of a prompt heavily while degrading the middle.
hence forgetting chapter 3.
Exactly. However, if Google's DeepThink architecture actually solves that attention degradation, like if it can maintain perfect, uniform recall across 2 million tokens without hallucinating it, completely alters enterprise workflows forever.
Because you aren't just summarizing an email anymore.
Right. You are no longer chatting with a single document. You are feeding the model entire decades of legal case histories, complex architectural blueprints, or millions of lines of source code, and having it reason across all of it flawlessly.
And that capability alone would justify all that infrastructure spending we just talked about.
Absolutely.
But capability is only half of the story on July 17. Because while Google is launching Gemini, the World Artificial Intelligence Conference, the WAIC, is opening in Shanghai.
And the guest list for that is what makes it so pivotal. President Xi Jinping is attending in person for the first time since 2018.
Which is a massive geopolitical signal.
It formally elevates AI development from a commercial sector to a top-tier national security priority for Beijing. And it is happening in the exact same week that China's stringent AI companion laws take effect.
Right.
Beijing just forced ByteDance to strip away all the anthropomorphic human-like features of their Dubao AI agent.
So they are actively deciding how the technology is allowed to interact with their society. At the exact same time, ByteDance is releasing models with frontier image capabilities, and Goldman Sachs is formally telling their clients to invest in Chinese AI ecosystems.
This is the real friction point. July 17 is a clash between raw technical benchmarks and rigid governance.
Yeah.
Tech media is going to spend the whole week obsessing over Gemini's reasoning scores and tokens, but the capability of a model in a vacuum doesn't matter. What actually matters is the governance architecture landing simultaneously.
Because we have China stamping its national authority at the WAIC, South Korea committing nearly $1 trillion to physical infrastructure, and the U.S. staring down the barrel of that August 1st NSA and CISA regulatory deadline.
Exactly. The tech specs released on Wednesday are just the engine. The governance frameworks being codified this week will determine what kind of vehicle that engine is actually allowed to be placed in and who gets to drive it for the next decade.
So to pull all of this together for you listening, the underlying structure of the AI industry is just shifting dramatically right now.
Yeah, it really is.
The major labs are failing independent safety tests as they void their own pledges to keep up with competition. Lawyers are stepping into that safety vacuum, using mechanisms like IPO filings and federal sanctions to pry open the black box of training data. And meanwhile, international powers are bypassing the software debate entirely, pouring trillions into the physical hardware and energy grids required to run these models, which sets up a massive collision between technological speed and global regulation this week.
It is a profound transition from the theoretical to the physical and the legal.
And understanding the mechanics behind these shifts, why an S1 filing acts as a legal trap, or why high bandwidth memory dictates geopolitical power, that is what actually makes you well-informed in your daily life and work.
Right. It is not about memorizing the latest model version. It is about grasping the underlying structural forces directing the industry. And as we watch this infrastructure scale up, I want to leave you with this final thought. We are watching governments worldwide recognize AI as a critical utility on par with the electrical grid or the water supply.
Yeah.
Yet, the private companies building the generators for this new grid are actively failing independent safety audits, they're abandoning their own guardrails under competitive pressure, and they're fighting in federal court to hide the blueprints of how they built these systems in the first place.
Wow.
So what happens when a global economy becomes irrevocably dependent on a foundational infrastructure that is fundamentally unregulatable?
That is the exact paradox we will be watching unfold over the next decade. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the blueprints and stay curious. We'll see you next time.